Welcome to another lesson, and I'm so proud that you made it this far. If you're directly jumping onto this video, I'm still proud of you and still happy that you're choosing to learn the things which interest you the most. In this lesson, definitely we're going to talk about batch processing and also share with you a UI tip at the end that's going to make your Photoshop life much simpler and easier. First of all, let's talk about batch processing. What is batch processing, you might ask? Well, in terms of Photoshop and image editing software, batch processing is simply processing a lot of images all at once automatically, and it is something I highly recommend that you do not ignore. Let's say you have 5 photos or even 300 photos and you want to upload all of them to Facebook. Now keep in mind, all of these photos are 50 megapixels each. It doesn't really make sense to upload them directly to social media. You have to optimize it. Maybe resize it a bit, maybe add a little bit of sharpening, maybe add a little contrast, right? Now you tell me, does it really make sense to open each of the photos one by one, process it, export it? It's going to take a lot of time, right? It's just not ideal. There has to be an automated process for it. Now you might say, Unmesh, there is Photoshop action, but still you have to open up each photo, apply the action, export it, and it can be a tedious process. What if I told you there's a way in which Photoshop can automatically open all of those 300 photos, process them, everything automatic, export them for you, and all you got to do is to just apply a simple function so that Photoshop can run through it and get your images ready. Then they all will be ready for export the way you want it. And that's what we're gonna learn. Now there are several ways in which you can batch process in Photoshop. We're gonna learn 2 ways, which is droplets and image processing. There might be some plugins to do that. There also might be some extensions to do that, but these are the 2 main ones that you can use in your day-to-day Photoshop life. So let's go ahead and get started. Here we are in a typical day in our Photoshop world, and usually we come across this all the time. We have lots of images open, lots of documents open, and in every document we have done something or the other. So in this document I've color graded a little bit, and in this document I've applied similar settings, but these are a little different. The curve is different according to the image. And let's say I want to export it all just for the web, or even just export it with these changes that we have made. Now, does it really make sense to click on one document and then go to File and then go to Save As, or then go to Export As, and do it repeatedly for each and every document? It doesn't, right? So here, what you have to do, let's say you have a lot of documents open and you have worked on all of those documents, maybe added your watermark, maybe did some color grading a little differently. So all you got to do to export all of these open documents all at once, and that's what we are learning first, saving or exporting all the open documents. Here's what you got to do. Go to File and then Scripts, Image Processor, and here you are going to choose which images you want to process. Definitely we want to process all of the open images. All right. Next we will choose where do you want to export it, where do you want to save it. So let's select the folder. Let's create a new folder called Export. All right, let's open that folder and hit OK. Now we have determined where we want to export it. The third step here is file type. Choose what file types you want. You can have JPEG, you can also have PSD, you can also have TIFF. So if you choose and tick all of these, you will have the file saved in all of these formats for you. So I just want JPEG, and here we have the quality. So 1 is the minimum, 12 is the maximum. So as you do increase the quality, the file size would increase. So you need to choose what works the best for you. So I'm just going to go with the highest quality. Now here is an essential checkbox, and that is resize to fit. Do you want to resize the images while you export it? We'll get to that later. For now, I just want to export it just the way it is. There's the 4th step where we talk about actions. Again, we don't want to play any actions to these. If you want, you can, and you can check to include ICC profile. Now all you got to do is click on Run. Now Photoshop will automatically export the images that are open in the format of your preference and whatever other preferences you might have chosen. Now it's doing that in the background. It has already done that. So if I go to that folder, let's go to Export. Have a look. There's a new folder inside of it called JPEG. So if you open it, have a look. All of these documents are exported as JPEGs. That's how simple it is to export or save all of the open documents. Now you can also save it as a PSD if you want to work on it later. You already know how to do that. So instead of JPEG, have PSD checked. It's all up to you. Let's close it all by simply going to File and then Close All. I don't want to save changes, apply to all and hit no. Everything is closed. Now, let's talk about applying an action with it and also resizing, because this is a real world situation. So here I have some photos of a beautiful lady from her travel. Now, we want to optimize it for social media. Now, if you go to Facebook Help Center and find this article called "How can I make sure that my photos display in the highest quality possible?", you would notice that it has given a dimension for regular photos, which is 2048 pixels. So we want to make sure that the width is 2048. You can also add some color grading to it. We can also add some sharpening to it. That's up to us. We'll get to that later. Let's do something simple. Let's open one of the photos in Photoshop, for example. Let's create an action first, and I'm assuming that you might have some action already in place. If you don't, you can create them. This is just for demonstration. Now let's open up actions by going to Window and Actions if it's not already open for you. Let's create a new set called Grading. You can name it whatever you want. Now inside of that, let's create a new action by clicking on the plus icon right over there. And we're just going to add a simple warmth. Let's name it Warmth. Let's start recording. So, a simple action, and that is adding a color lookup table, a simple crisp warm. That's it, with an opacity of about 25. Alright, let's go ahead and stop the action. This is what we just did. And now we want to export all of these images with this little warmth applied and also resized. And here's how we would do that. You might already have guessed it. Let's close all of it. You're going to go to the same image processor by going to File, Automate. Now, keep in mind, you don't have to have any documents open in Photoshop for this to work. File, Automate, and not Automate, sorry, Scripts, Image Processor. Now, let's select the folder. In this case, we're going to choose Travel Photos folder. So in here, have a look. In this Travel Photos folder, we have those photos of that beautiful lady enjoying her vacation. Hit OK. So we have that. Now, where do you want to export it? I want to export it in the same location for convenience, because last time we exported it in a custom location. So you can choose whatever you choose, so you can export in the same location. Also, one more thing, if you have this checked called Include All Subfolders, if there are other folders inside of that folder which also has images, those would be included too. If you have that unchecked, if there are other folders inside of that with more images, it won't be processed. So it's up to you. Let's save it in the same location. If you choose to save it in a custom location, you can choose to keep the same folder structure if you have multiple folders with multiple images. Anyway, so of course, if you're exporting for Facebook, let's save it as JPEG. Also, we want to check resize to fit. Now, this is something which we need to learn and try to focus here, try to follow along what's these values. This might sound like a simple width and height, but it is actually the maximum values of width and height that is allowed while export. What does that mean? Let's say I set the width to about 10 pixels, all right? And you have an image with a width and height of 10,000 by 10,000. So it has an upper limit for the width to 10 pixels. Now, it will not change the aspect ratio. It's going to squish down the width to 10 pixels. And according to that, the height would also change according to the aspect ratio of the image to 10 pixels. Now, think of these as upper limits. Even though the height is set to 10,000 right now, the upper limit of the width is 10. And that is going to be a bottleneck here. Making sense? Let's take another example. Let's set the width to about 500 and the height to about 10. Let's say you have an image which is 400 by 400. All right. Now, if the width is under 500, that's fine. It's not gonna change the width. These are the upper limits. It's gonna be okay with 400 as the width. But then Photoshop will look at the height. The height upper limit here, we have set it to 10. So it's going to set the height from 400, which is outside of the limits, to 10. And as a result, the width would also turn into 10 if it's a square aspect ratio. Making sense? So these are the upper limits. With Facebook, we want the width to be limited to 2048. Okay? The height can be anything. Let's put a very high number here, like 10,000. Now we want to save it as JPEG, quality 12. We do want to resize it. Of course, we also do want to run an action here. So let's check that. And it's inside grading, and the warmth is the action that we want to apply. And all you got to do now is just simply click on run, sit back, relax, and enjoy a cup of coffee or whatever choice of drink you like. Well, I like some Coke sometimes, and sometimes other kinds of soft drinks. But anyway, it's done. Now let's open up the same folder. Inside of the same folder, we have a JPEG folder, and here you have all of these images. And if you check by right clicking on it and going to properties, let's look at the details. Have a look in the dimensions section. It is 2048 pixels wide, and it is true for all of these, and in all of these that warmth has been applied. Pretty cool, isn't it? Now let's take this a step further and let's make it even more automatic and simpler with droplets. Now droplets are an incredible feature in Photoshop that you can use to process all of these images without even opening Photoshop. Yes, you heard it right. And this is how to first create it. Yes, you have to create that application kind of thing first. So to create it, first of all, let's open any one of these photos. I have a series of photos here. Let's open that, and let's create an action first. Let's create an action for uploading it to the web again. And I'm just going to create a new set called social. Now in this action, we're just going to add some sharpening, do some resizing, and you can apply whatever effect you want. This is just for reference. All right. So inside of that, let's click on plus, and let's say I want to create an action for Facebook. Okay. Let's hit record. The very first thing that we want to do here is to resize it. To resize it, we're going to go to image and then image size. Now, we want to make sure that it maintains the aspect ratio. Also resampling, let's set it to automatic. If you have a smaller image, you want to make sure that it's just expanded to 2048. Let's set the width to 2048 and hit OK. All right. That's the first step. If you just click on that arrow, it says accurately that we had set the width to 2048, which is correct thing. Let's continue. The second thing which we want to do here is add a little contrast. And we can do that simply by adding a levels or a curves adjustment layer. And let me share with you one more fun way of adding contrast, and that is just add any adjustment layer which by default doesn't do any change to the image. Like if you add a curves and don't do anything here, it won't do any change to the overall image, right? Or even if you add levels, unless you change the sliders, it won't do any change. So choose any adjustment layer like that and just change the blend mode to something like overlay or soft light. That way you automatically add a little bit of contrast. But I feel again this is too much, so we're going to go with about 40%. The next thing we're going to do is simply add a little sharpening. So press Ctrl Alt Shift and E to create a stamp visible layer. Let's go to filter, other, and then high pass. Let's choose 1 or 2 or 1.5. Hit OK and change the blend mode from normal to overlay. So some sharpening, some contrast and resizing. Now, another thing to have in the action is the save command. Yes, you have to have that inside of the action. We're just going to go to file and then save a copy. Now, if this was an older version of Photoshop, I would have asked you to choose save as, but in this case, we have to choose save a copy, and this is how the newer version of Photoshop works. And let's choose that, and you can save it anywhere and choose whatever name you want. I just am choosing this folder in random. Make sure it is JPEG. Click on save. Make sure quality is 12 maximum, and you can choose the quality according to your preference. Hit OK. All right, it is saved. Now that is also recorded here. Let's stop the action. Let's make sure it's recorded properly. So we want to save it as a JPEG. See, it is recorded. That's the most important thing. Make sure this is recorded properly. And location is saved here, but then again, it doesn't really matter because once we create a droplet, we can change the location. Now we are ready to create our first droplet. Let's go to File and then Automate. Choose Create Droplet. Let's walk through all of these. First of all, where do you want to save that application or the droplet in? Yes, that's kind of an executable application. So let's choose a folder and we're going to have it in the same folder. Let's name this Facebook Processing and click Save. Now we have to choose which action do we have to play here. So it is in the Set Social and Facebook is the action that we just created. Now in here, the first checkbox is Override Action Open Commands. So if you do check that, Photoshop tells you what's what. It tells you that when this option is on, source files will be opened from the source folder only by open steps in the action. So only if the action has open steps, it will open. Otherwise, it won't. We don't have any open steps in the action. So we have to keep it unchecked. It says that if there are no open steps, no files will be opened. So we don't want that. We do want to include all the subfolders because if inside a folder we have another folder with some other images, we do want to include that. If you don't want to include that, have that unchecked. The third one is Suppress File Open Options dialog. If there's a specific option that shows up while opening the file, if you check that, this droplet will automatically suppress it. If there's a color profile warning while playing a particular action or opening a particular file or any color profile warnings during the image, if you do want to suppress it, you can check that, but I don't want to do that. We want to stop for errors. Great. Now, destination is the most important thing. Let's choose where we do want to export all of these processed files. So let's click on Choose and create a new folder named Facebook Exports. Let's select that folder, click on Select Folder. Now we have another checkbox called Override Action Save As Commands. If you have it checked, it's going to use the Save As command inside of the action, which we do want because we created a saving step. All right, because we wanted to have the choice of the format, we wanted to have some other choices, so we did create a save command in the action. Hit OK. So we want to use that command. Now, how would the images be named? This is the name format. You can choose your format accordingly. First, we want the original image name. So we're going to choose document name. Okay, and then we want to have written here as Facebook export. Okay, and lastly, you can have the extension. If it's JPEG, it's going to be JPG. If it's GIF, it's going to be GIF. You get the point. Whatever you chose while we were creating the action. So the file name would look like this. My file, which would be the original file name. So if your file name is, let's say, DCIM001, it would be DCIM001-Facebook export dot whatever extension you chose. If you chose JPEG, it's going to be JPEG. Set the starting serial to 1, and if you also want macOS and Unix compatibility, you can have them checked. Right now I'm working on Windows, so Windows is checked by default. If you're working on Mac, Mac would be checked by default. You get the point. Hit OK. Now with that, the droplet is created. So if you open that folder, have a look at this droplet. It's like another application of its own, and this is just a sample image we saved. Let's delete that. All right, now let's say we have a group of images inside a folder and I named it droplet. We want all of these images to be processed without even opening Photoshop. Let me just go ahead and close Photoshop. All right, Photoshop is not open. Have a look. None of the Photoshop's versions are open. And here we have a folder that we want to process. We want to upload it to web or social media. All you got to do is to drag all that folder and drop it onto this. That's it. It will automatically open Photoshop for you. I didn't do anything else. It will automatically play that action, export the image where you chose it to export, and everything would be done automatically. So that's an amazing batch processing technique. Let's see what Photoshop does. It's opening all of those photos one by one and processing it. Let's wait for it. Now in that folder inside of Facebook exports folder, have a look. All of these are processed, and look at the naming we chose. We chose the original file name -Facebook export the extension, of course. So have a look. This has been sharpened, the contrast has been added, and definitely this has been resized. The same things have been done with all of these images. Now let me share with you a workflow tip that's going to make your Photoshop life easier to navigate. So have a look at this photo. Let's say we wanted to apply a soft blur effect. We press Ctrl or Command J, and then we went to filter. We have to find where the blur is or which blur we want to apply, filter, blur gallery, and inside of that we have to choose field blur. And then we can choose whatever we want. Here in the middle, we want 0 blur. And then as it goes to the top, we want to add a little bit blur. Or you can also use iris blur here. So what I'm trying to say here is that, first of all, let's go to iris blur. And let me show you this effect. It's a very nice effect. Okay, let's bring these points closer to her eyes and the face. And you can add a very nice soft blur effect here. Anyway, so whatever effect that you like and like to apply, it's sometimes hard to find in the menus. Let's say this is the effect that I wanted to apply and I applied it. So it's hard to find where the blur is. It's hard to find sometimes where the iris blur is. So instead of having to go through all of that menus, you don't have to have all of that in the very first place. Also, you can use highlights for the functions that you use the most. And the way to do it is simply going to edit and then menus. Now in here, let's say inside of filter, I never find myself using adaptive wide angle. You can click on the eye to hide it. It won't show up. Also, I personally don't find myself using lens correction. I usually do that in Camera Raw or Lightroom, whichever raw processing software I'm using. And then I don't really use 3D. And then let's assume that inside of blur, I don't really use the regular blur. Like, who uses the regular blur? Nobody. It has no setting. Not even blur mode, box blur. We do use Gaussian blur. We do use lens blur, motion blur sometimes, radial blur sometimes, shape blur we don't use. It's very, very rare. Smart blur. Like, what is even this thing? It feels like I'm hearing it for the first time. Surface blur is very important. So now, only these which are turned on will show up. Now, on top of that, let's say I use Gaussian blur the most. I can even highlight that. So you can click on none and choose a color for it. Let's go for red, hit OK. Now what will happen is if I go to filter, adaptive wide angle and the other filters that we had just hidden just don't show up. So you don't have to scroll through all of that. I just did 1 or 2 for you. You can just hide all of the features that you just don't use. Then if you go to blur, all of the useless ones are gone and the ones that we use the most is highlighted. So it just makes it so simpler. You don't have to scroll through all and find it and then click on it. It doesn't seem like much, but it really makes the process easier and faster. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I hope you learned something from batch processing and also this highlighting and hiding menu system techniques that we just learned. Now, when it comes to batch processing, again, sky is the limit. You can create as advanced actions as you like. Just make sure that the actions that you do create can be applied to a lot of images. No matter what you do, we do have to be mindful of the images we use and the actions we use. You cannot have a group of images where one image is extremely bright and the other is extremely dark, and you're applying an action where you apply just one kind of curve to it. So it just won't fit right in all kinds of images that you're editing in a group. Maybe for a session where most of your images are dark, you apply a different kind of action. Maybe in a session where most of your images are a different way, maybe horizontal or vertical or even a little brighter, you can apply a different kind of action. You get the point. Be mindful of what groups of images you are throwing into that droplet. I hope this video helped you. I hope you learned something new. I hope this encourages you to experiment and play with your own images and try out batch processing. Thank you so much again for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson. Till then, stay tuned and make sure that you keep creating.